Chapter 97, Is He Mad? By the time they reached the campsite, it was already night. Thanks to the moonlight, the darkness wasn't oppressive. The gravel path gradually transitioned into a grassy field, the signs of winter's end revealing themselves in faint patches of green. Of course, at night, the grass shimmered like a faint purple under the light. The moon is bright. Ingrid glanced at the moon overhead, then stuffed the pebble he had been holding into his pants pocket. His right arm twitched slightly. They had walked for over half a day to get here, during which Ingrid had continuously practiced Torres knife technique. The muscles in his forearm ached and felt sore. Clenching and unclenching his fist a few times, Ingrid reassured himself that the pain would subside by tomorrow. Having pushed his body to its limits while mastering the isolation technique, he was now attuned to how quickly his muscles could recover. Actually, he thought, maybe a brief rest would suffice. All day playing with rocks. What a weirdo, Finn muttered as they arrived. Ingrid had felt her occasional sidelong glances during the journey. My hands get restless. It's a habit, he replied dismissively, surveying the campsite. It wasn't a typical site with campfires and pitched tents. To be precise, it looked more like a network of burrows rather than a campsite, with numerous holes dotting the area. Find a burrow you liked, cover the entrance with a camouflage top, and you're set. If you want it cozy, heated leather would be nice, but we don't have enough to go around, one of the soldiers said, holding up a large tarp. The material's muddy brown hue blended seamlessly with the ground, making the burrows nearly invisible. Heated leather, huh? Ingrid did have one in his backpack. I wonder if Esther's doing okay. She had hissed incessantly when he left, clearly displeased. But taking her along wasn't an option, so he had no choice but to leave her behind. It's cold, so share a burrow with someone. You, newbie, can bunk with me, Finn said, pointing at Ingrid. Ingrid's pack contained the heated leather, and the burrows didn't seem particularly spacious. Two small-bodied people might manage, but Ingrid was hardly petite, even if he wasn't as broad as Audin. It would definitely be uncomfortable, not to mention the added awkwardness of sharing a space with a woman. If anyone finds out, it'll cause a commotion. Judging by how fast rumors spread in the unit, it often felt like someone was spying on him, ready to spill everything. And sure enough, Torres was already staring at him. I'll be fine. I've got my own arrangements, Ingrid said. Finn looked disappointed. What about me? Am I supposed to sleep alone? Torres raised his hand to chime in. What? The platoon leader of the Frontier Defense Unit came here without gear. At that, Torres glanced at Ingrid, then down at himself, clearly noting that he was smaller in stature. What is this nonsense? Either way, he ended up grumbling at Finn's remark. As Finn began unpacking her things in the burrow she had claimed, Torres approached Ingrid. Why do I feel annoyed? Why ask me? Maybe because you're tired. Is that what it is? Really? Infamous platoon leader who even charms company commanders, is that what you think? Yep. You bastard. Torres chuckled and walked off. The burrow wasn't as cramped as it seemed. Slanted into the ground, its interior was lined with cloth to prevent dampness. Once he draped the camouflage tarp over the entrance, it felt surprisingly snug. After fetching the heated leather from his pack and wrapping himself in it, the space became comfortably warm. You're well prepared. Would you like some? A scout approached, offering jerky. No, I've got my own, Ingrid replied. The jerky he had tasted previously had been so flavorful that he'd gone out of his way to acquire more. Family recipe, the soldier said modestly, smiling. The soldier's mother ran a small eatery, tucked behind an inn. Known for its spiced grilled meats, the place had earned a stellar reputation. I should stock up on more when I get back. Ingrid made a mental note to ask Kreis to procure a steady supply. He chewed on the sweet and spicy jerky, marveling at the tender texture. For someone utterly hopeless at cooking, such delicacies were always fascinating. Ingrid's meager talents lay entirely in wielding a sword. Even as a mercenary, he dabbled in various trades but mastered none. His dream of knighthood had always been his sole focus. After finishing the jerky, sleep overtook him. This was the land of beasts and monsters, after all. Henry's warning echoed in his mind as he dozed off. Still, the first night passed uneventfully. The scouts had exempted him from night watch duty for the day. Before dawn, Ingrid awoke instinctively, stepping outside and stripping off his upper garments. The cold air jolted him awake, invigorating his senses. Fully alert, he began performing the isolation technique. Starting with exercises that involved raising his knees to his chest in rapid bursts, he transitioned into a series of other movements. "What are you doing?" The last night watch, leaning against a tree between burrows, stared at him, bewildered. "Morning training. Do you even know where you are?" "The cross guard's front yard." "And you're still doing this?" No one in the scout unit recognized Ingrid, so their confusion was understandable. As he moved on to sword practice, the rest of the unit awoke one by one, including Finn, who stared at him along with the others, everyone except Torres. "What's wrong with him?" Finn muttered to herself. Torres, now wearing a thick cloak instead of a blanket, approached and replied. "That's just what he does on a regular day." "Does he do that every day?" Finn's mind wandered to Ingrid's physique, recalling what she'd seen just yesterday. The memory was still vivid, his sculpted muscles, powerful legs, and the imposing presence in between. "Well, that's not something training can improve," she mused, brushing that thought aside as she focused on the rest of his form. It was clear why his body looked like that. Life in this land was brutal enough to strain anyone's body to its limits, naturally cultivating extraordinary physicality in its inhabitants. And to stand out even among such hardened people, the only answer was to work twice as hard as everyone else, just like Ingrid did. But knowing and doing were entirely different things. Will he even have the strength to fight a monster if one shows up this afternoon? The way he moved looked like it would cause muscle cramps any moment, so she asked with concern. "He sparred with me over 10 times after doing that and even marched yesterday," Torres responded casually, hinting that his own stamina wasn't far behind Ingrid's. But Finn's eyes remained glued to Ingrid. Why? There was something about the way he swung his sword, it felt as if he was pouring his soul into each motion. "He's like a madman." Her words carried no malice, only a mix of admiration and growing fondness. Torres couldn't help but notice. What did he even do? Torres felt as though he was witnessing the magnetic charm of the platoon leader. All Ingrid had done so far was bathe, march, sleep, wake up, and train in the morning, yet he seemed to have already captivated Finn, a seasoned scout leader in this treacherous land. Is this how he won over the company commander too? But was it truly about his physical prowess? Or maybe it was the impression he left by the river? Torres's thoughts were cut short. Everyone's brief fascination with Ingrid faded as the call for breakfast came. At dawn, Finn's scout unit avoided lighting fires. Sustaining themselves solely on dried meat and fruit wasn't sustainable, either. Fortunately, their camp's location offered options. A half-day east lay cross guard, and just a short walk northwest brought them to a small forest, their makeshift dining hall. "You coming to eat?" "If we're lucky, we might catch a rabbit." Finn's unit consisted of 8 members, not a large number. Their meals were simple, often supplemented by local hunting. Adding Ingrid and Torres hadn't changed that routine much. "There's a stream nearby. You can wash up there," Finn mentioned to Ingrid. "Can I wash my clothes too?" he asked nonchalantly. "Cleaning yourself, eating, and maintaining gear is a soldier's duty," Finn replied matter-of-factly. Their situation was unusual, with only 2 reinforcements joining, both at platoon leader rank. But Finn, being a ranger accustomed to the front lines, didn't dwell on it. Soon, they reached the forest. Establishing a temporary base near the stream, they began gathering dry branches. In the process, they encountered 2 beasts. Ingrid merely observed. The beasts, twisted versions of animals, were creatures called moors. These deer-like moors had peeling, bluish skin and lifeless black eyes that stared at Ingrid. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Arrows flew from 3 scouts, striking the deer moor's forehead and neck. It collapsed with a groan, its head hitting the ground. The scouts approached, prodding it with their feet to confirm its death, then retrieved their arrows. "TCH, it snapped," one muttered as he examined a broken arrow shaft. "They're skilled," Ingrid noted. Their precision was no accident, these scouts had survived in a land teeming with monsters and moors. Yet Ingrid wondered how he'd fare against them in close combat. It wouldn't be easy, certainly not against multiple opponents. "Do you even have hunting experience, being a high-ranked soldier and all?" one scout asked. "A little," Ingrid replied. He had picked up some skills from Enri in his mercenary days. While he wasn't an expert hunter, his abilities lay elsewhere. The thought was interrupted when one scout returned, a grim expression on his face. "Damn it! Gowls! Should we relocate?" "How many?" I counted 10, but there might be more. I didn't stick around to check. Gals weren't a common sight, but they weren't unheard of either. Moving their camp was ideal, yet they had just set it up. Facing 10 gals was a daunting prospect for scouts, especially given their speed and the poisonous claws that could cripple their strength. Which direction? Encrid asked, breaking the tense silence. His sudden question caught the scout off guard. The gals, he clarified. Understanding dawned on Torres. He's asking where they are. Encrid's skill with a greatsword made him particularly suited for fighting monsters, something Torres had witnessed firsthand. These gals aren't your average kind, Finn warned. You don't need to worry, Torres reassured her. I'll just keep them from running, he added, positioning himself beside Encrid. Don't let a single one escape, Encrid replied, determination in his voice. Finn exchanged glances with the other scouts. While combat was routine for them, 10 gals posed a serious threat. Encrid sniffed the air, catching the faint scent of decay. He pinpointed their direction using his heightened senses. Without hesitation, he launched himself forward. Hey, wait! Finn shouted, but he was already moving. The scouts followed instinctively, compelled to witness what the man who had flaunted his physique earlier could truly do. When Encrid faced the gals, Finn's eyes widened in astonishment. Chapter 98, Escape Route. This gal, despite its hunchback, was incredibly fast. Its claws were longer than the ones he had encountered before. Still, it wasn't faster than a harpy. Nor were its claws sharper than Rem's axe. Dots and lines. Encrid connected the dots, mapping out every movement around him into the realm of instinct. Facing the approaching gal, there was only one thing to do. Draw his sword and swing. Ching! The blade emerged from its sheath, performing its duty flawlessly. Ka! The foul-smelling gal charged forward, but Encrid's blade fell in a calculated arc, guided by the movements he had already discerned. Crack! Slice! A perfect vertical slash from the crown. With his left foot forward, the downward strike split the gal's skull precisely. Retrieving the embedded sword in a single motion, he repeated this 2 more times. Each strike, a diagonal slash aimed downward, dispatched another gal. In mere moments, 3 gals lay motionless, their skulls split wide open. Meanwhile, Torres threw a dagger from the side. Whoosh! The spinning blade lodged itself in the head of a gal attempting to flank them on the left. Encrid moved swiftly, stepping forward to slash the neck of another gal. When one got too close, he delivered a powerful punch to its head. Another gal fell as Encrid thrust his blade into its skull with one hand. There was no struggle, no desperation. 13 gals were slain in mere moments. And amidst their extermination, Encrid felt something peculiar. A pattern. The gals attacked in an oddly organized manner, as though they had been trained to fight. While this made them easier to deal with, it also meant that anyone lacking overwhelming skill could quickly find themselves overwhelmed and killed. What could it be? These gals were unlike the ones he had encountered in the sewers or along the riverside earlier. Gals were the most common man-eating monsters, simple beasts incapable of thought. Could creatures like this employ tactics? No, it was impossible. Unless they had formed a colony. In such cases, a leader would emerge to command the group, transforming them into what was called a colony. But there were no signs of that here. So there was no reason to dwell on it further, it was likely just a quirk his instincts had picked up on. As he considered whether to wash his blade of the gal's blood in the nearby stream, Finn approached him. What's with you? Finn stared at him intently. Her question seemed loaded, but it was likely about his ability to handle the gals so effortlessly. Encrid responded. I mentioned I lead an independent platoon. It's a highly specialized combat unit. It wasn't a lie. After all, the company commander's intent had always been for their role to be extreme. Who would believe the unit consisted of only 9 members? And yet, it was sustainable because every member's skill exceeded the norm. Though overshadowed by the fame of the Frontier Defense Force, Encrid personally knew it wasn't comparable. They can't even compare. Rem, Ragnar, Audin, and Jackson, those 4 were still leagues ahead of him. Even with his ability to dispatch gals so efficiently, they remained beyond reach. I still have a long way to go. Despite knowing the direction the milestone pointed, those 4 felt like they were still on the other side of an unbridgeable gap. In contrast, Torres from the Frontier Defense Force was within reach. If it came down to a life-and-death battle, he might lose, but it wasn't hard to imagine winning either. "You're an excellent fighter," Finn said. "You're amazing," echoed a soldier who had been on night watch earlier. Several others gathered around, their eyes on Ingrid. He felt oddly out of place with the attention, not used to such recognition. It prompted his offhand comment. "We don't need to relocate the base." "Agreed," Finn replied. They decided to return to the temporary camp, guided by a soldier with drooping eyes who pointed out the direction to the stream. The camp, which also served as a dining area, wasn't far. "Hey, I killed 3 too," Torres muttered on the way back, but no one paid him any mind. No one except Ingrid, who lightly tapped Torres on the shoulder. "You made things easier," he said. Deep down, Torres knew his contributions were minor at best, serving only to reduce inconvenience. He could have handled everything alone. It dawned on him again. He's been holding back. Or perhaps, Torres reconsidered, it wasn't that Ingrid had been hiding his skill, it was just that sparring and real combat were worlds apart. If they fought for real, risking their lives, I'd lose. Even among the elite ranks of soldiers, Torres ranked in the middle tier. But Ingrid seemed beyond that. Realizing this made Torres regret teaching him the hide knife technique. "Hey, don't practice that anymore," Torres said, noticing Ingrid fiddling with a thin stone out of habit after the battle. "Why did you teach it, then?" Ingrid replied with mild amusement. "Just forget it," Torres muttered. Ingrid had no idea what Torres was feeling. The sting of seeing someone surpass you, someone you thought far below, was not a pleasant one. Of course, Ingrid couldn't understand such feelings, this had been his life. Throughout his journey, others had outpaced and overtaken him, never looking back. But even so, he never gave up on his dream, swinging his sword until his palms bled. That was the kind of person Ingrid was. "Let's go wash our blades," he said. Gal blood reeked and carried oiliness that could damage a blade if left uncleaned. "All right," Torres replied, albeit listlessly. Having been excluded from the hunt, both headed to the stream, where they also washed their sweat-soaked clothes. Drying them was another issue, but they had until nightfall to let the campfire handle it. The stream's water was clearer than expected, flowing swiftly enough to carry away waste. Finn even declared it safe to drink. After filling a leather canteen and taking a sip, Ingrid's stomach growled. "You too?" "Me too," Torres remarked with a chuckle. After gathering their belongings and tightly wringing out their clothes, they returned to camp. "Here you go," a now noticeably kinder soldier said, handing them a long branch to hang their clothes near the fire. Nearby, another soldier was skinning a snake. "Lucky find, hey," the man said, prompting nods from Ingrid and Torres. Despite its unappetizing appearance, snake meat was rich in protein, a highly sought-after food. Even Audin had said so, if it was available, you ate it. "Yeah," Ingrid replied, sitting nearby. Torres joined him, and Finn took a seat across the fire. The campfire crackled softly, producing almost no smoke. This is a skill, too, he thought. Ingrid had seen hunters and scouting parties manage such tasks with ease before. They would start a small fire with tree bark and leaves, then carefully add finely chopped, dry wood to keep it burning. Of course, this wasn't a simple job, it required some finesse. Whenever Ingrid tried, he failed more often than not. For these people, however, it seemed second nature. Smoke briefly rose and then disappeared without a trace. One of the team members slid charred coals under the neatly stacked logs. Logs tend to give off a lot of smoke when burned, they explained. This meant they had to be cautious not just when lighting the fire but also when adding logs afterward. While it wasn't likely that the smoke would be visible from cross guard, such caution was second nature to scouts. Soon, 2 team members grilled snake meat while others prepared dried jerky over the fire. One of them fetched a large pot, boiled water, and added a mix of fruits and berries before straining them out. "That one's nicknamed the cook," Finn remarked, sharpening her hand axe with a whetstone as she sat with her back to the ground. Seeing her focus reminded Ingrid of REM. "I hope he's not causing any trouble," he thought. After a brief nod, the group began their meal. The snake meat was surprisingly tender and well seasoned with salt, making it unexpectedly delicious, especially the tail. "When I return, I'm opening a restaurant," announced the soldier responsible for the meal. The firelight illuminated his youthful face, and he admitted to being only 22. "You should aim to become a great ranger instead," Finn teased. "I prefer being a chef, Captain," he countered, eliciting laughter from Finn, who waved him off with a good-natured nod. The atmosphere was warm and tight-knit. Ingrid chewed on the snake meat and warmed up some jerky. When he offered the cook some seasoned jerky, the young soldier's eyes lit up. "This is amazing. Where'd you get it?" "In the city. I'll tell you when we get back." The young man nodded eagerly, savoring the treat. "Promise." After a hearty meal, they divided into shifts and rested. "Proper rest is part of a ranger's duties," Finn said. "Scouting here isn't that meaningful anyway. The priority is survival, and stamina is key to that." The resting spots were carefully chosen. Some used hollowed-out trees as shelters, others climbed up branches, and a few remained by the fire. Once their rest was over, Finn addressed Ingrid and Torres directly as the sun dipped toward the horizon. "There are 3 ways into the fortress. Let's discuss them. First, there's the rat hole." She elaborated. "It's a route used by smugglers. Those who know about it use it freely, and it's not heavily guarded. But the danger lies in who else knows about it." "Next?" Torres asked. Finn continued, listing the options: scaling the walls at night or disguising themselves as merchants at dawn to sneak in. "The quickest way is the first, the safest is the second, and the easiest is the third." Even without explanation, the risks were clear. The third option was the least risky, followed by the first and then the second. From Finn's tone, it was evident she didn't consider any of these options particularly dangerous. "Getting inside the fortress isn't the hard part," she said. "The real challenge is finding the cat." Ingrid agreed. It would be troublesome if the target was imprisoned or already caught. Without any clues, they might even need to investigate the fortress dungeons. "If there's no trace in the city, we'll retreat. The scouting party will return to the main group," Finn added. "Sounds about right," Torres replied, as though expecting it. After discussing further instructions received from the main unit, Torres remarked, "Only the 3 of us will infiltrate. Which route do we take?" "That's for you to decide," Finn replied, folding her arms. "You know the situation here best." After some thought, Finn chose the rat hole. "Unless we're incredibly unlucky, we won't get caught. We'll leave at dawn." "Not at night?" Torres questioned. Finn explained, "Morning is better. The guards are more alert at night, and it's easier to scale the walls the following evening." Ingrid observed the flow of decisions quietly. After eating, training, and practicing his sleight of hand with stones, the day ended, and they returned to their shelter. The situation seemed surprisingly calm, almost too peaceful. Is the Aspen scouting party not active here, he wondered. The next morning, they set out with Finn leading. Contrary to Ingrid's expectations, they didn't take a wide detour. People assume the western side of Crossguard is a natural barrier with its monsters and beasts, Finn explained. Scouts do patrol occasionally, but it's rare, and they wouldn't deploy their best here. Without a clear purpose, even Aspen scouts avoid this area. Finn's pace was quick, her ranger skills apparent. Her ability to spot and avoid traces of monsters and beasts was remarkable. Her steps were particularly noteworthy. She pressed her heels into the ground first, a subtle movement that caught Ingrid's attention. "We'll need to take a slight detour here," Finn said, hacking through the undergrowth with the axe at her belt. Ingrid drew his sword and sliced through the bushes, cursing himself for not inspecting his blade earlier. He'd been too focused on training. As they cleared the brush, they stumbled upon clusters of red berries. "Don't eat those, they're poisonous," Finn warned playfully. "Noted," Ingrid replied. "You could talk to me casually, you know," Finn suggested. "Sure," Ingrid agreed. He rarely turned down such proposals unless it involved sharing a shelter. Finn glanced at him mischievously. "How about sharing my shelter after this mission?" "No." TCH. "Hey, I'm walking right next to you," Torres interrupted. "I know," Finn replied shamelessly, her bold personality shining through. They reached a small ridge overlooking the fortress walls. Beyond the ridge, the gates lay to the west. There were no moats, but Finn explained, why bother with moats? Getting here past the beasts is nearly impossible for most. Her skill as a ranger was evident. Few could reach this point, let alone lead others here. The group approached the rat hole. Finn entered first, invoking a ranger's motto as she went. "The ranger always leads," she declared. Ingrid followed, observing her smile, her leather helm, and the orange hair peeking through it. Behind them, Torres brought up the rear. What awaited them inside, however, was utterly unexpected. "Idiots," a voice sneered. Before they realized it, they were surrounded. A unit armed with long spears and shields awaited in the spacious passage, wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. Behind them, the sound of bowstrings being drawn filled the air. Turning, they saw soldiers armed with shortbows blocking the exit. They hadn't even walked half an hour into the passage, it was a trap. Spears and shields ahead, arrows ready behind. A perfect ambush, inescapable for anyone but knights of exceptional skill. "Damn it all," Torres muttered, despair thick in his voice. "We've been waiting for you, you wildcat," the enemy commander sneered. Finn's expression darkened at the insult. "You bastard!" Chapter 99, When Luck Does Not Follow, 1. At the break of dawn, Ingrid woke to face yet another identical day. His routine remained unchanged, honing his body through the isolation technique. Another day began anew. Most of it was just like the days before. Training his body, observing the scouts, and Finn. After finishing his swordsmanship training early in the morning, Ingrid inspected his gear. Since the battle with the Gauls, he had neglected to check his equipment in the mornings. Starting again from here. It marked the beginning of a new day. It was also time to decide on a direction. Would he take the same escape route again, or choose a different path? He lifted his sword to eye level, tilting it slightly, keeping it parallel to the ground. As he inspected the blade, he found no nicks or damage. Looking at the blade, Ingrid pondered what mattered most amidst these repetitive days. First, assess the situation. If there were 3 paths ahead, he wanted to know what lay at the end of each one. It felt as though the 3 paths had been waiting for him all along, laid out before his eyes. How he would move toward tomorrow was a matter for later consideration. After polishing the blade with prepared leather and double-checking his other gear, he unwound and rewrapped the leather strap on the hilt. This act marked the start of a different kind of day. Since it was impossible to count each passing day, he had developed this method as a way of commemorating the first day over and over. Rewrapping the leather strap on the sword grip symbolized the beginning of his second day. Ingrid remembered. "If we're heading out this morning, shouldn't we get a move on?" Torres, eating jerky for breakfast, commented casually. Having tasted the seasoned jerky, Torres often clung to Ingrid every morning. Ingrid was about to respond when he noticed Finn approaching. On her left hip, she carried a hand axe, her sturdy boots bore thick soles, and on her right hip, she wore a short sword. Over her body was a thin, well-tanned leather armor. He had previously noticed how the armor flexed easily with her movements. It must be lightweight, he thought. Her equipment reflected the light armament of a scout unit, who carried only the essentials to move swiftly. Rangers go first. This was their motto. Being the ones who walked ahead, they carried the lightest loads. Compared to heavily armored infantry, Ingrid himself was classified as a light infantryman, but his gear was relatively heavier when compared to scouts. Even just one long sword could be cumbersome. But what about their skills in an actual fight? This had been a lingering question over the past few days. Considering the physical conditioning he'd achieved through the isolation technique, he doubted he would lag behind Torres. With time to spare today, it seemed like a good opportunity. To make today different from yesterday, he dismissed the option of sticking his head into the same hole first thing in the morning. What about scaling the wall under the cover of night? Ingrid proposed as soon as Finn drew closer. Beating around the bush only prolonged conversations unnecessarily. Sometimes, exposing one's intentions and goals openly was advantageous for steering a discussion. Ingrid excelled in this regard. Out of nowhere. "I have a bad feeling about it." When Finn tilted her head in confusion, Ingrid replied without hesitation. She was well aware of the nickname his unit had given him. Aside from titles like Demonic Squad Leader or Spellbreaker, the most commonly used phrase to describe him was, "The one loved by the goddess of luck." This was it. If another soldier or commander claimed to have a bad feeling, it might be easy to dismiss. But when it came from him, it carried a different weight. A bad feeling. Of course, Finn, unaware of his reputation, found the statement puzzling. Torres, however, responded differently. After briefly studying Ingrid's face, Torres stroked his chin and said, "If all 3 options are equally viable, crossing the wall doesn't sound too bad." He agreed instantly, without even questioning the reason, simply trusting the gut feeling. Finn tilted her head again, puzzled by this odd trust, before speaking. Are you aware that climbing a wall isn't exactly easy? Nothing in this world comes easy. Ingrid replied. When 2 out of 3 people agreed on a path, the decision was easy. Finn didn't particularly care which path they took. That's why she had laid out all 3 options to begin with. With a nod, she conceded. All right, fine. There was no need for a battle of wills. Finn even felt a subtle fondness for Ingrid. How about first? Ingrid suggested as he secured the sheathed sword to his waist, freshly wrapped in leather straps. Oh ho! Torres chimed in enthusiastically. The invitation was clearly directed at Finn. Me? You want to spar with me? I'm not exactly a combat specialist. That couldn't be true. No one with such a well-trained physique could avoid being skilled in combat. I'm not a swordsmanship specialist either, Ingrid retorted, shrugging as Finn showed her palms. Even barehanded would be fine. We don't want injuries before an important mission, after all. Would it be a valuable experience? Who knew? Regardless, the sight of her conditioned body piqued his competitive spirit. And Finn, despite her amiable feelings toward Ingrid, suddenly felt a similar desire to test her skills. It's been a while. Though she had once been passionate about training, she had stopped after hitting her limits. Still, she wasn't someone to be easily bested, not even by the likes of Ingrid, whose swordsmanship had impressed her during his battle with the Gowls. Without swords involved, she doubted she'd lose easily. Everyone had their strengths, and hers was hand-to-hand combat. It's been a while since I've seen this, remarked one of the scouts. A man with a bandit-like appearance but a surprisingly soft demeanor. He had once helped dry Ingrid's clothes over a branch, and his comment suggested familiarity with Finn's skills. Stop talking nonsense, Finn muttered, her eyes now gleaming with determination. She was already in combat mode. We've got time until nightfall, she said, granting permission. Ingrid unsheathed his sword and set it aside, removing his gambeson and leather armor. Wearing only a thin shirt secured with leather straps at his chest, he stood opposite her. The scouts and Torres quickly formed a large circle, creating space for the duel. At the center, Torres chuckled and said, "This feels like déjà vu." He was likely referring to the sparring match during Ingrid's promotion. Torres recalled how much Ingrid had changed since then. Let's begin. Soon, the duel commenced. Finn's specialty was close-quarters combat, and she made no attempt to hide it. She shifted her stance, sidestepping before swiftly closing the distance. Ingrid had also learned striking techniques from Odin. He spread his legs front and back, stepping lightly while extending his left hand straight out. Unlike wide, sweeping punches, a direct, straight punch had a shorter trajectory, faster, resembling a sword's thrust. Finn displayed an almost acrobatic movement upon seeing it. With her eyes wide open, she ducked low, evading the punch with the minimal necessary movement. Ingrid's thrusting punch only grazed her hair. This reminds me. The movement brought back memories of his time escorting Leona Rockfried. Back then, when Ingrid had climbed to the second floor to save her, he had dodged a dagger thrown by the enemy with just a slight tilt of his head. Finn's evasion of his punch mirrored that motion, flowing into a close-quarters engagement. Is she going for a tackle? The thought was brief, and his judgment was swift. With a sharp motion, he drove his right elbow downward instead of following through with his extended left fist. It was a brutal attack, one that could have punctured her lower back had it landed. But Finn avoided even that. Her movements were serpentine, flexibly twisting her waist and stepping to Ingrid's right side. Not only had she repositioned herself, but she had also grabbed hold of Ingrid's wrist and forearm with both hands. Ingrid instinctively flexed his muscles to break free from her grip. At the same time, Finn coiled her leg around the inside of his calf. From there, it became a battle to see who could seize the other's joints first. Dodging, blocking, and grappling, they tumbled to the ground repeatedly. There was a loud thud as their heads struck the ground at one point. Without either noticing, Finn's foot or hand sometimes landed in Ingrid's groin. The Aelkaraz style. Ingrid recognized the technique Finn was using. It was one of the many things Odin had thoroughly taught him about. Aelkaraz was the name of one of the most infamous prisons across the continent. Long ago, a prison warden there had devised a technique to inflict excruciating pain on prisoners without leaving visible injuries. This grappling art, known as the Aelkaraz combat style, relied heavily on joint locks, earning it the nickname King of the Dirt. The name came from those who rolled on the dirt training grounds of Ael'Karaz, claiming the title of king through this notorious skill. Ingrid countered with grappling techniques from the Vala style, which Audin had taught him in what he mockingly called bedroom battles. However, Finn's proficiency was several times higher. And so, do you admit defeat? The moment he thought he had defended himself well, Finn had already trapped his neck between her legs. If she wanted, she could break his neck. Being caught in this position, Ingrid could feel how incredibly firm her thigh muscles were. I surrender, Ingrid conceded, his neck still in her hold. If we fought with swords, who knows? But this is my specialty, Finn said, releasing him. Both of them were covered in dirt after tumbling around so much. Dust clung to their hair, scattering whenever they moved. I need a wash. Want to join? Finn asked. I'll pass, Ingrid replied without hesitation. The casual suggestion essentially meant bathing together, and he had no intention of agreeing. TCH, Finn clicked her tongue playfully, standing up and brushing off her pants. See you at dinner, she said before leaving. After she was gone, Torres approached, grinning. If you two are going to roll around like that, why not just find a cave? Who? When Ingrid looked at him questioningly, Torres laughed even harder. You lasted the longest of anyone who's ever grappled with our captain. A nearby squad member chimed in, yeah, she was really all over you. Now that he thought about it, their bodies had been pressed together during the fight. I didn't have time to think about that. Still, one thing became clear. She's an excellent sparring partner. Not as good as Audin. Audin could keep him utterly helpless while offering endless commentary, but Finn was perfect for refining his Vala grappling skills in this current situation. Of course, this didn't mean he would squander today. As always, his focus remained on escaping this predicament. Later, Ingrid practiced Torres's hidden knife techniques under a tree. You're still at it? I've taught plenty of people, and some just can't get it, Torres said, watching him with a serious expression. Is that so? Ingrid replied calmly. Fine, suit yourself, Torres muttered, giving up quickly. After a few days with Ingrid, he had realized something. This man was stubborn to the core. When you suggested heading for the wall, why? Torres asked. It seems like the better option. And your gut's been right so far. Mostly. In truth, it was through relentless repetition that he had achieved what seemed like instinctive decisions. Explaining it wouldn't make anyone understand. All right, I'll trust you, Torres said with a nod. The rest of the day was spent training, resting, and preparing. They cleaned themselves, took brief naps, and readied their gear. By nightfall, Finn led them toward the wall. The path was treacherous, involving climbing rocky terrain under the dim light of 2 moons. Good thing we've got 2 moons tonight, Finn remarked. Is it, though? This route's brutal, Torres complained, drenched in sweat. Finn chuckled, told you it'd be twice as hard as the other paths. Eventually, they reached a vantage point where the crossguard's wall loomed before them. Luck's on our side, Finn said, smiling. Torres glanced at her skeptically. How is this lucky? We didn't encounter any monsters or beasts along the way. Finn's words, though reassuring, did little to ease the difficulty of the task ahead. Climbing over the wall promised to be even harder than crossing the rocky terrain. Let's go, Ingrid said, following Finn silently, fully aware that there was no turning back. Chapter 100, When Luck Does Not Follow, 2. Do you really need to take that long sword? It was just before their departure from the campsite and makeshift garrison. Finn was pointing out the equipment Ingrid and Torres carried. Can't I? You've never climbed over a wall, have you? Of course, they hadn't. Climbing a wall wasn't exactly a common experience. Let me say this again, travel as lightly as possible. If you wear that thick gambeson, you'll collapse before even reaching the wall. Finn was right. Even crossing the rocky mountain ahead was a significant task. When they finally crossed the mountain and arrived at the wall, Ingrid was grateful he had followed Finn's advice. Travel as lightly as possible. That was the key. Finn crouched low and approached the wall, sticking close. Ingrid and Torres followed her lead, keeping their profiles low. The flames of torches flared vividly in the defensive towers built between the sections of the wall. Can we really sneak in unnoticed? A chill ran down Ingrid's spine. The grass underfoot barely reached their shins, offering no real cover. And it wasn't even a particularly dark night. If rain obscured the view, it might have been different. But the surroundings were clear. Even without the torches, spotting someone moving across the open plain would have been all too easy. His heart raced. The idea of scaling the wall seemed distant. They might be shot down by arrows before they even got close. If not for the heart of the beast, his legs might have buckled under the tension. Ingrid's gaze caught Finn, who led at the front. She moved without hesitation, low and steady, her steps sure and purposeful. Does she have some kind of assurance? He had no idea. Finally, they reached the base of the wall after a nerve-wracking crawl. The distance they had covered wasn't far if they had sprinted, but the looming shadows of the guards on the tower made such an attempt unthinkable. Was this path planned to avoid the sentry's line of sight? Torres whispered as soon as they pressed themselves against the wall. Finn's response was as absurd as it was straightforward. Nope. If we got spotted, we'd just run for it. What? We didn't get spotted, though, so it worked out. I've noticed that the guards tend to slack off on bright nights. If it were our people, no chance. But them? Totally different. It wasn't some grand strategy, it was sheer luck. This is insane, Torres muttered. Ingrid shared the sentiment. But when he thought about it differently, it made a certain amount of sense. Run if you get caught. To keep up with a ranger's speed, they'd need cavalry. But this land? It was a domain of monsters and beasts. Terrible terrain for cavalry to maneuver. If a griffin, a beast known to relish horse meat, were to show up, they'd be doomed. Griffins required a minimum of a squad of well-trained soldiers to handle, unless a knight was present. Whether or not griffins were here, cavalry simply wasn't an option. So the answer was simple. On a night when the odds were low, move swiftly to the wall. If they were unlucky, an arrow might fly their way. But what archer could accurately hit a shadowy figure on a bright night? It was a bold plan, leveraging the guards' complacency. Did you plan your whole day around scaling the wall at night? Surely, the timing of their arrival under the dual moons was no coincidence. When Ingrid mumbled this aloud, Finn turned her head toward him. The moonlight illuminated one side of her face, leaving the other in shadow, giving her an almost ethereal glow. With a smirk, she replied, "Sharp, aren't you?" "Yeah, on dual moon nights like this, they slack off." "You saw the shadows lingering near the guard tower, didn't you?" "Only 2 of them." "Not many, right?" Ingrid nodded and glanced up. For guard towers rose along the wall, with 2 sentries per tower. "Not a lot. If we climb up, there'll be a walkway, likely narrow." The structure of the wall was probably similar to other fortifications like the border guards. He mapped it out in his mind, predicting what they'd face after scaling the wall. Planning ahead was crucial. Moving without forethought led to disaster. And Ingrid wasn't the only one strategizing. "I just hope we don't exhaust ourselves climbing the wall," Torres murmured, sharing his concerns. Finn shrugged lightly. "We've come this far. Just trust in your strength and grip." Ingrid looked up to gauge the wall's height again. It was roughly 3 to 4 times his own height. "This way." Finn led them again. They reached a section of the wall cast in deep shadow by the moonlight and the towering guard towers. Pressing against the wall, the surroundings seemed pitch black. In the distance, torches burned atop the guard towers. Close by, he could feel Torres and Finn's presence. A distant, mournful sound of a night bird broke the silence. Beyond that, the only contrast was between the moonlit ground 10 paces away and the encroaching darkness around them. Finn's eyes gleamed faintly in the darkness. Though her eyes appeared brown during the day, now they seemed to reflect the faintest light. Walls like this aren't as heavily guarded as you'd think. It's rare to find anyone whose job is strictly to prevent wall scaling. You just have to avoid the patrols. Do you know their patrol schedules or have someone bribed? Do I look like I'd have that? So, back to relying on luck again. Finn and Torres whispered to each other. For Ingrid, it didn't seem entirely reliant on luck. Moonlight. They just needed to slip past the patrols and hide in the city once they crossed. Beyond this wall is the slum area. We can blend in if we're careful. Patrols in that area would likely be minimal. Why wouldn't they be? Even the border guard neglected such areas. No soldier enjoyed the stench or the constant begging from the residents. And at night? Wandering drunks or desperate vagrants might pose a threat. In other words, this infiltration wasn't just a gamble but a maneuver built on experience. "You've done this before," Ingrid remarked. "You're pretty sharp," Finn replied with a grin. Scaling walls wasn't something most would consider lightly, which made it unexpectedly easier. Who'd bother scaling the wall when a tunnel or other means might suffice? It was precisely because it was unconventional that it worked. Of course, it was far from easy. From traversing the rocky mountain to preparing to climb the wall, nothing had been simple. Finn spat into her hands, rubbing them together, and then reached for a small leather pouch at her waist. The pouch was filled with powdered chalk. She sprinkled it onto her hands, rubbed them, and began climbing the wall. Finding gaps to grip, she pressed her fingers into the stone and pushed off with her feet, clinging to the wall. Despite its solid construction, the wall had plenty of cracks between its stones. Finn began climbing the wall, pausing periodically to drive the stakes she had tucked into her belt into the crevices at a diagonal angle. From top to bottom, the stakes formed a slanted path. She hooked a rope onto each stake and let it dangle, then continued scaling the wall with her bare hands. "Do you think you could do that?" "Me? Not a chance." Ingrid and Torres, hidden in the shadows cast by the moonlit wall, exchanged words as they watched Finn climb. She moved like a monkey, or perhaps a nimble squirrel, efficiently dropping ropes as she ascended. Ingrid and Torres grabbed the ropes and began their climb. The stakes, driven diagonally into the wall, creaked and shed bits of stone dust, but they held firm. They didn't rely solely on the ropes. When gaps appeared among the interwoven stones, they wedged their toes or fingers into them for support. Both men had covered their hands in powdered chalk they had prepared, gripping the ropes or pressing fingers and toes into the crevices to steady themselves when they paused for breath. At first glance, the climb seemed manageable, but once started, "I might die here." It was far harder than expected. Even Ingrid, honed by the isolation technique, felt his muscles burning. His forearm muscles, in particular, throbbed sharply. This was despite years of wielding and swinging a sword, which had strengthened them significantly. Different movements activate different muscles, Odin's words resurfaced in his mind. Viewed in that light, climbing the wall was a perfect exercise to complement the isolation technique. Looking up, he saw Finn scaling the wall briskly, her movements sure and steady. If there's a start, there's an end. After much effort and exertion, they finally reached the top of the wall, roughly 3 to 4 times the height of an average man. Carefully hooking their hands and feet onto the edge, they pulled themselves over and dropped down on the other side. When Ingrid set foot on the ground, he sensed no one nearby. His instincts and sixth sense told him it was safe, offering a moment of relief. "You worked hard climbing up in the middle of the night." A clear, melodic voice shattered the silence. It was a woman's voice. Then came a sharp snap, crack, followed by the sound of multiple torches flaring to life. Flames ignited between the torch stands, illuminating the moonlit area with a brilliant glow. Some trick had been performed to light the torches with a mere snap of her fingers. It was a surprising feat, the kind you'd see in a circus. But surprise wouldn't freeze their actions. "Ha!" As his eyes adjusted to the torchlight, Ingrid took a deep breath, inhaling the air that had been burning his lungs during the climb. His hands moved swiftly. A dagger slipped from his belt and flew from his hand. It wasn't the silent whistle dagger but a standard throwing knife. The technique he had learned made it as precise as it was sharp. Thud! Another dagger followed Ingrid's, slicing through the air. But both daggers deflected, not blocked by a shield but repelled in midair as if hitting an invisible barrier. The sound they made was akin to someone striking a poorly made drum. "Well, that's just rotten luck," Torres muttered, his voice full of frustration. "Why?" Ingrid asked without turning, gripping another pair of daggers in his hands. "A mage," Torres replied grimly. "A mage? Here?" That was Ingrid's first thought. It was then he finally saw her, standing between the torches. A woman silhouetted by moonlight and firelight, her long, wavy hair falling over her shoulders. Her slit, snake-like eyes gleamed in the dim light. The distance was barely 10 steps. The soldiers around her numbered fewer than 10, each armed with crossbows aimed steadily at them. "This is bad." It was the only conclusion he could reach. The mage was about to speak when Finn's voice rang out. "Get down!" Ingrid instinctively crouched low, pressing himself against the narrow wall behind him. Then, whoosh! A heavy object tore through the air, brushing past Ingrid's face and displacing the air with a palpable force. He felt it against his cheek. A thrown axe. Realizing it immediately, Ingrid looked forward and finally saw the transparent barrier reflecting the moonlight, a defensive shield barely visible upon close observation. Crack! The spinning axe struck the shield with a sharp noise, sending cracks spidering across its surface. The axe halted in midair as if lodged in the barrier. Jump down! Finn shouted again. Torres was the first to respond, moving swiftly. He grabbed the ropes hanging outside the wall and used them to slow his descent. Finn followed, leaping from the wall without hesitation. She moved as if she were flying, her descent controlled and deliberate. Though she wouldn't break her legs if she landed properly, the height was comparable to a 5-story building. A fall from such a height would be fatal if mishandled. Even so, hesitation wasn't an option. Ingrid decided. If we have to escape anyway, it would be better to deal a blow to the mage before retreating. Lowering his stance, he gathered strength in his thighs. Recalling a squire's technique he had once attempted but never mastered. Thud, boom. Pushing off the ground with explosive force, he closed the distance in an instant, his blade aimed for the mage's neck. In his hand was a broad-bladed guard sword. If the axe could crack the shield, then break it with force and cleave her head. He remembered how he had killed a mage before. Get close and strike. Avoid unseen spells by intuition. Confidence born of past experience emboldened him. Though Bolt remained, they could wait. Ingrid saw the mage slit eyes. In that moment, meeting her gaze, his limbs nearly went limp. But his heart, a beast's heart, throbbed powerfully, restoring his strength. He thought he had her. But confidence can sometimes be a fatal flaw. There are those who deceive your instincts. Be cautious. Mags are such foes, Jackson's words echoed in his mind. Pierce. The sound of flesh being penetrated. Followed by searing pain. You idiot! Finn's voice, shouting from above, confirmed he hadn't fallen to his death. Cough. Ingrid's sharpened senses caught the sound of Torres coughing, as if in warning. When Jackson had spoken about Mags, Ingrid had dismissed it. After all, he'd killed one before. He'd evaded spells with his instincts before. But this time, he had made a grave mistake. Not all soldiers are equal. Not all knights are the same. So, what about Mags? Each one is unique. Ingrid looked down at his arm, where thorny vines had ensnared him. A spiked vine pierced his neck. I am Wretchel the Thorned Rose, the mage declared. Her words were the last thing he heard before he closed his eyes. It was the second end to his day. When the third day began, Ingrid practiced his swordsmanship, trained his body, and rehearsed Torres's hide knife technique using slim stones as substitutes. It was his way of marking the third day. And then, can we disguise ourselves as merchants at dawn? He inquired about the third method to scale the wall. Chapter 101, When Luck Does Not Follow, 3. The third plan, disguising themselves as merchants at dawn 2 days later to infiltrate Cross Guard, wasn't particularly difficult to propose. I have a bad feeling about this. It was the same reason they dismissed the idea of climbing over the fortress wall. Torres supported the idea, Finn gave a nonchalant nod, and the group settled on it. Well, I guess we're staying here another night. Their campsite was a dugout shelter, prepared well in advance. Upon hearing the news, the cook soldier grinned and asked, "Shall I bring out that for tonight's side dish?" The forward reconnaissance team, led by Ranger Finn, usually stayed on missions for an average of 6 months. Though unexpected events sometimes cut their time short, forcing a return in just 1 or 2 months, this time they had already been stationed here for 8 months. Naturally, they'd resorted to various survival tactics, including salting the meat of captured game to make ham. Well then, shall we have a drink with it? Finn eagerly jumped on the suggestion. Despite being a unit that should have been more on edge than even those at the front lines, they were either unusually thick-skinned or desensitized. Or maybe, they're so sharp during ordinary days that they allow themselves to relax like this when the time is right. Even at their makeshift dining area, where smoke rose from their cooking, vigilance was never neglected. The soldiers maintained constant rotations, patrolling the perimeter in wide circles, with 2 sharp-eyed members always watching the surroundings. Watching this unit, a phrase came to mind. Those who are too rigid break easily. You need to know how to bend when necessary. Who had said that? It wasn't a drill instructor. It was a paladin from a wandering order who had briefly passed through a rural town. Pressed for time, he couldn't give a full lesson but instead suggested a short, intense sparring match. Despite his rugged appearance, with a hearty laugh and a habit of stroking his beard, he was a respected clergyman and an extraordinary warrior. Flexibility doesn't mean weakness. A solid foundation ensures you won't break. Need me to simplify it? Stop screaming every time you swing your sword. He'd commented that every swing of Incrid's sword sounded like he was shouting defiantly, as though refusing to break. Relax your muscles. A supple body lets the blade spring forth more effectively. The laughing paladin's face overlapped with the faces of his squad members, especially REM's. Through countless sparring sessions, REM's strength had proven to be both powerful and flexible. REM's mastery of the axe, rooted in ease and control, came from confidence, not overconfidence, but a deep-seated trust in his abilities. No, it's not just that. REM's whip-like forearms and fluid axe strikes. His relaxed yet controlled movements. All these elements led to a simple truth: REM used only as much force as necessary. And what about Ragnar? Though his swordplay seemed almost lethargic, it was a seamless fusion of unthinkable skill. The same went for Jackson and Audin. Jackson, despite his stiff demeanor, always maintained an air of composure. Audin would tease Incrid during their bouts, twisting his arms playfully, but he also provided insightful advice. But what about Incrid himself? My shoulders. No, his whole body was always tense during combat. He fought as though every connection, every movement, required his full power. He had always believed that anything less than his best was meaningless. And that very belief had burdened his shoulders. Incrid swung his sword at the air. The swing was far lighter than usual, almost disappointingly so. This is just letting go of power. Letting go of power didn't mean diminishing the essence of swordsmanship. Clarity emerged, methods, paths, signposts, everything seemed faintly visible now. Knowing wasn't the same as doing, of course. Incrid knew this all too well. He was painfully aware of his own limits. The revelation that he needed to let go of the tension in his shoulders was just a start. Yet even that realization made his heart race with excitement. The joy of knowing he could walk a better path, a euphoric sense of clarity filled him. For Incrid, the sword was life, and life was the sword. It was his companion on the journey toward his dreams. And with that elation came a question. Is struggling desperately the only way forward? He had resolved never to waste a single day for the sake of tomorrow. He'd fortified his will countless times. Clinging on and thrashing around wasn't difficult, he had always done so. But it's not always necessary. With that thought, he swung his sword downward. Whoosh! The sound of the blade slicing through the air was different from before. Hearing it, Incrid's lips curved into a faint smile. That simple strike brought back memories. When had it been? In the tall grass, alongside Andrew and Henry. It was that kind of strike, deceptively simple, leaving no sensation in the hands. The kind of strike only those called geniuses seemed to execute effortlessly. Though he had tried countless times to replicate that sensationless strike, he had never succeeded, until now. It worked. It had just happened, right here in his hands. How could he not feel elated? That swing just now, it felt different somehow, Finn remarked. Indeed. A rare kind of slash, Torres agreed, seated beside Finn. Finn added, but seriously, is he okay? Why does he keep grinning like that by himself? Don't ask me. I've only seen him a few times. Everyone knows he's not exactly normal. Incrid let their chatter wash over him, focusing only on swinging his sword again and again. As he moved, his thoughts continued to flow. Struggle if you must, but what if he struggled without tensing his shoulders? In the monotony of today, was flailing around truly the only solution? Was screaming out with all his might the only path forward? What mattered was his determination to keep walking toward tomorrow. To seize whatever lessons and insights he could along the way. And as he smiled, immersed in this clarity. Man, with that face, even grinning like that doesn't make him look crazy. Anyone else would just seem nuts, Finn quipped, sipping her drink. What about me? Torres chimed in, oblivious to his own lack of comedic timing. He was ignored outright. A few squad members chuckled, patting him on the shoulder. It had only been a few days since they met, but they were already quick to accept him into their circle. While he swung his sword fiercely, Finn, Torres, and a few other squad members shared a few drinks. There wasn't much to drink, nor was it hard liquor. It was cheap fruit wine, the kind you could easily find in the city. With it, they ate a few slices of salted and smoked ham, cut up from the provisions they treated as a makeshift dining hall in the forest. I should definitely open a restaurant. These words naturally slipped out to the scout who dreamed of becoming a chef. Ingrid couldn't even touch the alcohol. He had no intention of drinking today, and even if he wanted to, there was none left. By the time he was done swinging his sword and washing up, the rest had already finished it off. What, with that face, you're thinking of drinking too? Torres grumbled without much reason. Although it wasn't a time for laughing and chatting, it was still a moment to loosen up just a little. Of course, even during moments like these, there were always a few who remained sharp, like antennae sensing danger. Finn was one of them. Though she had a sip or two, she still had the responsibility of looking out for everyone. The night came as they returned to the cave. Whether heading for the burrow they jokingly called the rabbit hole or the city walls, no one was supposed to remain here today. The plan was to vacate the outpost once Finn left and regroup somewhere closer to the main force. That plan fell apart when they decided to disguise themselves as merchants, and now they faced a night that shouldn't have existed. The two moons rose, casting a blue glow across the surroundings. Before entering the cave, Ingrid tilted his head back to look at the twin moons. The large, ever-present moon hung full and bright. The smaller, second moon was visible only when it was full. Bright. The surroundings were illuminated. Staying awake all night wouldn't change anything, today would repeat itself anyway. He had already learned this while tunneling beneath the shoemaker's shop in the city. So there was no point in resisting sleep and exhausting himself unnecessarily. As the deep night was just beginning, he thought to himself, compared to today's repetition of yesterday, this was likely when they had just reached the city walls. A woo! A howl erupted from nearby. Ingrid had a rough idea why his sixth sense hadn't kicked in when he was killed by the mage. The reason his sense of foreboding hadn't activated. The spells interfere. The mage with the thorny rose or rose vines had been above his head the entire time he was climbing the city walls. She had interfered, dulling his ability to sense danger from above. He hadn't heard the sounds or felt the ominous presence. What about now? Shit! Wake up! We're under attack. The shout came from a scout keeping watch. First, there was the howl of a wolf. Then the soldier's urgent warning. Finally, came the sound. Tap! 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 Something was sprinting toward them. And then, a monster appeared, silhouetted against the moonlight. There's a species known as beastkin, who live on the far eastern edge of the continent, humanoids with traits of beasts. But the creature now before them was considered a failure, even among those beastkin. A failed creation of their maker. These creatures always thirsted for blood and harbored a deep hatred for humans. A woo! The owner of the howl stepped forward. Its ankles jutted backward, as though it stood on its toes. Its entire body was covered in grey fur, and its glowing yellow eyes gleamed with a beast's ferocity. Its snout protruded sharply, revealing rows of glinting fangs. The name of the monster silhouetted against the moonlight was lycanthrope. In other words, a werewolf. Naturally, these creatures were not classified as part of the beastkin species. Like most monsters, they couldn't be reasoned with. The one leading the pack was one-eyed. A scar ran across its left eye, leaving only a single glowing yellow orb to survey the surroundings. It opened its mouth. Caw! The monster's roar echoed. To Ingrid's ears, it sounded like a command to charge. Stay alert! He shouted instinctively. How would this night end? It felt like a 50-50 chance. Either it would end uneventfully, or something would happen. The outcome was the latter. Werewolves. And not just one or two. The pack split off in all directions, except for the leader. Even under the bright moonlight, it was difficult to spot them all at once. All that remained were the sound of clawed feet pounding the ground and shadows cutting through the darkness. Between the trees, in the places where the moonlight couldn't reach, glowing yellow eyes streaked like beams of light. The ones that burst into the moonlit clearing circled the gathered humans, running in dizzying loops. They moved so fast that their after-images lingered in the air. Damn it! Ingrid realized something here. It was the lack of foreboding. Why hadn't he sensed anything? Why had Finn, a veteran scout, detected the werewolf so late? Someone must have interfered. Which meant a mage was likely involved here too. The mere fact that werewolves had gathered in such numbers was strange. He didn't know what spell the mage had cast, but the result was clear in front of him. Even with a quick count, there were more than 10 of them. Over 10. That's bad. Torres, back to back with him, muttered. Ingrid drew his sword. Shing. Staying alive was all they could think about now. He didn't plan to die quietly, of course. Not a chance. As always, he would take one more step forward toward tomorrow. Ingrid steadied himself and raised his sword. The name of the monsters was lycanthrope. Beasts imbued with magic in their hearts. They were far more formidable than ghouls or other flesh-eating monsters. Taking down even a single werewolf usually required an entire trained squad. It wasn't advisable to hunt them in smaller groups, as casualties were all but guaranteed. And when a pack of them formed, it was recommended not to engage even with a platoon. Yet now. Damn, there's over 20 of them. The number had grown in such a short time. Their side had 10 people, including Torres and himself. The werewolves numbered over 20. And, as if to prove Ingrid's suspicion about a mage's involvement, the pack attacked in a coordinated encirclement. Even without strategy, werewolves were dangerous monsters, driven wild by their instincts. When the dual moon shone, they grew even stronger. And now, they were attacking in formation? How could he describe this? We're screwed. Torres's bitter remark was the answer. There was no way out. Ingrid fought fiercely. He killed 3 werewolves and severed the arm of a 4th. He even managed to toss a whistle dagger, injuring the one-eyed leader. It was a fierce resistance, leaving marks of defiance against the lycanthrope pack. Torres fought just as hard. Though he fell before Ingrid, he still took down 2 of them. Finn managed to kill one and was tackling her second before she was overwhelmed. As for the other squad members, they stood no chance. Ingrid, blood dripping from his shredded arm, stumbled. Just as he was about to deliver a final strike, his foot caught on something. It was a head. The head of the scout who had dreamed of becoming a chef. This is irritating. Even knowing death would reset the day, seeing something like this was never pleasant. Growling. 6 werewolves leaped onto him at once. Surviving was impossible. Being torn apart while alive was a first for him. Naturally, it was excruciating. As time passed, the pain faded. How much time had gone by? When he opened his eyes, the pain was gone. Before him was a soundless, rippling black river. A small boat floated in the river, along with its ferryman. Chapter 102, When Luck Does Not Follow, 4. What was more enjoyable for you? Dying skewered like a kebab on an arrow? Being strangled by a mage vines and pierced by its thorns? Or having your entire body torn apart by a lycanthrope? The boatman appeared and spoke with a laugh. A laugh that could only be perceived because he allowed it. It was strangely fascinating. How should one describe it? It felt as though someone had simply told him, the boatman is laughing. Ingrid knew the boatman was laughing, but he didn't actually see the man's face laughing, nor did he hear a sound. All he had was the awareness that the boatman was laughing. Having been asked a question, Ingrid answered. Toward the Black River, the small boat, and the boatman. He couldn't tell whether the answer was directed at the boatman, the boat, or the Black River. Still, he spoke. Arrows were the best option. Compared to being torn apart by a pack of lycanthropes or ensnared by a mage vines, that seemed better. Go mad. Lose yourself in madness to entertain me. Did it just seem like the boatman paused for a moment? Or was it an illusion? Ingrid wasn't mad. Not at all. He had simply answered because there was no need to hesitate. I was just answering logically. Crazy bastard. The boatman started with a laugh, then became angry. Though, of course, even that felt as though someone was narrating it. He wasn't certain the boatman was actually angry, he just sensed irritation. And that was the end of it. Darkness painted over the Black River. When Ingrid closed his eyes and reopened them. It was still the pre-dawn hours. The same day as before. Ingrid rose lightly. Neither his body nor mind felt heavy. Though the pain of being bitten and disemboweled by the lycanthrope still lingered. He decided to forget it with a single sigh. Even if he couldn't truly forget, moving his body and swinging his sword would make things bearable. Ingrid was calm, both in his actions and his heart. Relax your shoulders. At a time when he would typically be racking his brain for ways to survive or escape the day, Ingrid was as serene as a still lake. Hadn't he recently come to a realization? Is desperation the only answer? It wasn't. Walking toward tomorrow hadn't changed, but running at full speed wasn't always the fastest way forward. Nor was it always necessary to rush to the finish. There are 3 paths. As he moved his body as usual, he began organizing his thoughts. It all started with the gowls. Those things, too. Something was off. They seemed to be under someone's command or to have experienced such control before. There must be a mage involved. That mage was on a different level compared to the one he had faced before. The Thornvine mage, Retshaw. The name he'd heard remained vivid in his mind. Could he kill her? There was no need to ask that question. He had to. Next, his thoughts turned to the pack of lycanthropes, retracing his experience in reverse. A mage scheme, for sure. It was a certainty. If they scaled the walls, they'd face the mage. If they headed for the narrow passage, a unit would block them from both ends. The front was guarded by elite soldiers armed with broad shields and spears, while archers formed a rear blockade. A perfect setup. They couldn't have been this prepared without prior knowledge. He wasn't sure how, but the enemy had already figured out their movements. So, was there a spy? If there had been one, signs would have surfaced during the lycanthrope attack. Perhaps the information had leaked through other means. It was a situation the boatman would find amusing. All 3 paths were blocked by walls. And not walls one could overcome through simple training. Unlucky, perhaps. How could every situation seem so fatal? Still, did misfortune change anything? No. Ingrid remained the same. Unshaken. Clink. He tightened the strap on his sword hilt. It was a mark of beginning anew. Ingrid mentally divided the morning into segments. And moved accordingly. After practicing the isolation technique, he trained his swordsmanship. Then, he resumed practicing hide knife. Would you spar with me? He asked Finn, training in Valaf martial arts. Who's after you? You seem more urgent than usual today, Torres said as he prepared his gear. How many knives did he have hidden on his body? Ingrid watched as Torres strapped on a belt holding 8 knives and answered him. Just doing my best every day. You'll burn out that way. He wasn't fragile enough to burn out from just this. Shall we head out, then? Finn spoke as Ingrid's early morning training concluded. Sweat-soaked, he couldn't leave without changing clothes, so he quickly switched outfits and headed out. On the way, Finn mentioned how Aspen scouts were rarely spotted these days. He had heard that before. As they pushed through the underbrush, Finn commented on the edible-looking berries. Those are poisonous. Noted. Ingrid responded immediately. You're something else. What do you mean? Finn, cutting through shrubs with her dagger, joined in. You act like you know things. Like you've been here before. Was that a woman's intuition or a ranger's instinct? It is my first time. Talk casually. All right. Were they about to go into another round of playful chatter? That's what had happened on the first iteration of today. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, Finn didn't bring it up this time. Instead, she looked at Ingrid with an odd expression. Even though the day repeated, not everything played out the same. Some small things did change. This was the entrance to the tunnel they had arrived at. How deep is it? Ingrid asked just before entering. If we walk briskly, it won't take an hour. I see. Why do you ask? Just curious. Are you scared of the dark? Don't worry, I'll hold your hand. That's not it. Finn chuckled and then spoke up. Rangers always go first. The path sloped down. The same thing as before happened. Ingrid didn't give any warnings or special preparations to the others. Instead, he remembered everything that happened. What should we do if we get surrounded? He had never asked any of his squad members this kind of question before, meaning he hadn't learned anything about it. But from past experiences, he did know one thing. That one must avoid such situations at all costs. If he could avoid it, that was the right course. But if it couldn't be avoided, what should he do? That was something to think about from now on. Ingrid was in the process of finding an answer. Hurry up! The enemy appeared. It was a squad armed with spears and shields. There were at least 2 squads worth of soldiers. Several torches lit up the area ahead. Creak! As if waiting, a group of enemy soldiers with short bows blocked the rear. Seems like there are about 20 of them. Ingrid turned his gaze to the front again and looked at the commander, who appeared to be the leader. He was peeking out between shields, wearing an iron helmet that covered his forehead, leaving only his eyes visible. Though faint, there was a thrill of excitement in his eyes. It was as if he welcomed this situation. "You little wildcat." The commander spoke. "Damn it." Finn turned her head back and forth, then drew a dagger, holding it in reverse while lowering her stance. Her left hand shielded her face diagonally, while her right hand moved behind her, hiding the knife from the enemy's sight. It looked as if she were hiding her claws like a wildcat. Torres quietly moved alongside the shadows cast by the torches. Some of the soldiers with short bows followed Torres with their eyes. Sharp eyes. That was a well-trained soldier. As expected. If they fell into a trap, it would be over. It was the kind of trap where, if they weren't knights, there was no way out. Finn and Torres were elite soldiers. If this weren't a tunnel. If they weren't surrounded on all sides. Then it might be possible. But no, they could resist, but they would die. The commander was about to shout something when... Wait. Ingrid stepped forward, showing his left palm. He hadn't drawn his sword, signaling that he wasn't intending to fight. It doesn't seem like this person would be open to conversation. Torres muttered. Finn still looked ahead with a fierce glare. What's going on? The commander, confident in his capture, asked. Ingrid needed to shorten the distance with the enemy. As Torres said, they weren't people with whom conversation would work. He just needed a moment of space. Before the fight broke out, there was something he needed to confirm. Step by step. With both hands raised, signaling he had no intent to fight, Ingrid's gaze lingered on the enemy's armor and attire, clearly visible in the torchlight. Dust. It had piled up quite a bit on their gear. It had been just over an hour of walking. The dust on the enemy soldiers' bodies didn't seem like it had accumulated within today. They weren't just waiting for today. So this was a question to confirm something. How many days have you been waiting? What? There was surprise mixed into the commander's voice, as if Ingrid had hit the mark. That was confirmation. They hadn't waited with certainty. What was it that had kept them here waiting? It was curious now. Though, at this moment, curiosity didn't matter. The results did. What mattered was that these soldiers had been waiting here for days. You're good at hiding your presence. Ingrid said again. Every word was meant to probe. The commander couldn't have known that. You little, what are you? Are you a magician too? Had a magician been involved here? What was that Regressing woman with the rose vines doing? Regressing, huh? Ingrid took a step further. Shit, I don't know what you're talking about, but die. That was the end of the conversation. The enemy soldiers charged, and arrows and spears aimed at Ingrid, Finn, and Torres. The commander gestured to his soldiers and retreated. Finn, wanting to kill that commander, couldn't break through the line of enemy soldiers armed with shields and spears. Her skills were difficult to use in such a place. That's why she appeared to have only the strength of an average soldier. Torres was different. He moved in a way that threw off the enemy's expectations, hitting the wall and then flicking his hands in the air. For throwing knives shot out from his hands. Even Ingrid couldn't see where they were going. It was Torres's hidden move. But it wasn't enough. The archers and those blocking the front were all covered in thick leather shields. If you're going to target something, aim for their toes. That was as far as it went. Ignoring the idea of overcoming the wall, Ingrid decided to put his plan into action. Facing off against well-trained elite soldiers. And even more elite soldiers in groups. This was a completely new experience for Ingrid. There had never been a time when a group of soldiers would target him, given they had nowhere near the same skill. They had no such skill. He had gotten better with his sword over time. He'd killed the pervert and defeated the crazy Mitch Hurrier. Assassins had targeted him. But this was really the first time. fighting against a group, a squad, an army of enemies. In a battlefield, he could use his allies to his advantage, but here there was no such opportunity. Then, couldn't this be an opportunity to improve his skills? Thinking that, he couldn't help but mutter, "This is fun." The spear soldier, who had a terrified look, thrust his spear just before dying, seeing Ingrid laughing despite blood pouring from his mouth. Of course, Ingrid didn't care about that. He was only thinking about testing out various things. It's not enough with just focus and the sense of the blade. If his vision narrowed against a number of enemies, there was no answer. What if he used a heavy sword like when he fought the ghouls, or the wolf beasts, or the man-faced dogs, to slash and crush them? No. These weren't beasts, they were soldiers who knew tactics and strategies. They were thinking and planning. Just like usual. The only difference was that his shoulders were a little less tense than before. So, after spending 2 days trying to enter through the tunnel and failing, he would meet the magician on the castle walls. He'd been repeatedly caught by wretches' vines, and when that got blocked, he danced with the werewolves under the moonlight. Of course, that dance always ended in death. Ingrid had made up his mind, so he didn't feel any impatience. He would give his best in every moment. It didn't mean he was going to waste the day just because his shoulders were relaxed. After 42 days, he'd mastered the hide knife. How is this possible? Naturally, Torres looked at him with a startled expression. To him, it seemed like Ingrid had just imitated his secret move in a day. Just lucky. It wasn't a great excuse, but Torres had no argument. In just a day. He muttered, still in disbelief. The hide knife hadn't become more skilled just because Torres saw it. But Ingrid went past 70 days. He wouldn't show off the hide knife again in front of Torres. Now, it was enough to keep repeating it on his own. Every day, he mastered Valaf-style martial arts. He honed his skills through sparring with Finn, who had learned the Ilkaraz-style martial arts. And after repeating today over and over, Ingrid realized he no longer needed to keep practicing the hide knife, the Valaf martial arts, fighting the magician on the castle walls, climbing the walls to build grip strength, or training his swordsmanship by fighting the werewolves. All of it. He no longer felt the need to repeat it. Now, what comes next? It was time to move on to tomorrow.